just record an introduction video. YouTube made me upload it as a regular video. I don't know. I know how to do it on my other channel. I just never made one. Anyway, the point is, I decided I'm going to make another video immediately afterwards because I just feel like producing some information for this channel. I'm not going to go right into sort of these research videos I made a couple years ago. But for this one, what I specifically want to talk about is how I figured out I had autism. So this is like a very personal video, but maybe it could help somebody else who was figuring this out for themselves. What type of autism I'm diagnosed with, and whether I think it should matter whether you are diagnosed with anything or not, like professionally. Okay, I took my glasses off for a minute because I'm getting a terrible glare, and I'll just wear contacts next time or figure something out. But I do want to read something really quick in case you have never heard of. Basically, most people are familiar with classic autism, which is usually characterized, you'll notice, things that a lot of people do, a lot of autistic people, a lot of people on the spectrum do, which is stimming and things like that. But usually, if it's classic autism, there's limited speaking, things like that, and that's usually the type that people are most familiar with. And I was vaguely familiar with even classic autism prior to figuring out that that was going on with me. So, okay, I'm going to read to you what I was eventually diagnosed with by a doctor. Okay, so I was diagnosed with PDD NOS on the autism spectrum. That is pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified. And if you go to Wikipedia, basically see what I'm talking about right here, which I'm looking directly at Wikipedia. I know Wikipedia, but I'm just doing a quick overview thing right now. Okay, so severe and pervasive impairment in the development of reciprocal social interaction or verbal and nonverbal communication skills, or when stereotype behavior, interests, and activities are present. But, so those are all just, anywhere on the Asperger's autism spectrum, but the criteria are not met for the specific PDD or for several other disorders, often called atypical autism because the criteria for autistic disorder are not met, for instance, because of late age of onset, atypical symptomology, subthreshold symptomology. It may be considered milder than typical autism, though that's not always true. And some characteristics may be milder, others may be more severe. Common for individuals with this to have more intact social skills and a lower level of intellectual deficit than individuals with other types. Characteristics are communication difficulties, using and understanding language, difficulty with social behavior, difficulty with changes in routines or environments, uneven skill development, you have a really strong strength in one area, very weak in another, unusual play with toys or other objects, repetitive body movements or behavior patterns. As it then goes on to tell you, this is no longer included, hence the name of my channel, because right when I was getting this diagnosis, which I knew this because I had just researched the hell out of everything, this did become my special interest. Autism was for a long time. DSM-5 manual for mental illness does not include anything specifically for Asperger's or PDD NOS. Everything is just grouped under autism spectrum disorder. So it's not really, I didn't like that. That could be a whole nother video. But basically when I got this diagnosis, the doctor told me specifically that's what he was diagnosing me with, but that if I had came to him when I was younger, and I was in my mid to late 20s, this was about 5 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago. I figured it out about 5 years ago. I was diagnosed 4 years ago. He said if I had come to him in my teens, I most likely would have been diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, but that he didn't really care and it didn't matter because with the way that they were just grouping everything together, plus it's pretty much similar. I had always identified as an Aspie whenever I was, researching everything. I hadn't even heard of this specific part whenever I was doing that. So basically what happened with me is that when I was growing up, I had several issues socially that I did not know were going on until as an adult when I look back at everything. But this led to, during specifically high school, I mean, things had happened going up to there that I could go on for, and I will in other videos. But basically, I got bullied very severely. During my whole high school experience, I would have dropped out many times if I were not considered to be so intelligent, so high performing as a younger child. I was always interested in schoolwork. I used to get A++s, you know, you'd get like 105% from your teacher if you're used to that, you know what I'm talking about, because you put in all the work. Like, I did have a pretty good memory when I was younger, but I also studied and I also did all the work and, you know, then would go above and beyond, so to speak. Yeah, it's work speak when you work anywhere. But basically, I was like the model student. I was always one of, if not the absolute top student, in the top like 3 people in the class all the way up through 8th grade. And this means when I got into high school and I didn't know what the hell was going on and all of these social problems came about and I couldn't go to school a lot of the time. I missed a lot of school in high school. I would be constantly catching up on schoolwork and still usually pulling B's. I mean, sometimes I was still getting A's, like in English. I just love, you know, I love English. I love to read. But I would still do the work, especially if I was at home. But actually going to school and being tormented all of the time was terrible. So my grades would, you know, drop down. I mean, I didn't get bad grades, really, in anything except gym, which I flunked out of gym because I just stopped taking it for, like, harassment reasons, but who cares, right? And, I'm just not very good at math, and I did try, but if you combine with any type of missing school and being put in an advanced math class when you basically hate, it just wasn't a good situation with that particular class. But in general, I still did very well, considering the fact that I missed a lot of school in high school. And because what happened was, at a certain point, after being bullied so long, I would come up with terrible techniques. I mean, whatever would work to get me to go through school. But while I was there, I basically, like, enclose in on myself and just try to be, like, the smallest version of myself, and that I would not talk to anyone. I would just go about and try to, like, be ignored as the best I could, because I would rather be ignored than be constantly yelled at and called names and talked about to my face and behind my back. And I mean, not just behind my back in the colloquial way of saying behind my back, but literally like someone standing behind me talking about me. So at a certain point, that just became too much, and I would get panic attacks on the way to school when my dad was driving me to school, and I would just start crying and I couldn't breathe. And just basically, if you've ever had a panic attack or you want to look them up or whatever, just basically all the stuff that would be from a panic attack. But I didn't even know what that was at the time. I just knew I was freaking out and I couldn't go. I just couldn't go, and I'd have to have him drive me back home. And I mean, when that happened, it got to the point like, well, are you going to school? Basically, like, are you going to put me through the thing of waiting for you to get ready and get yourself together enough to get into the car to then go to school and be on the way there? And then when you see the school, basically, I likened how I felt in school to like a post-traumatic stress disorder, because it was like if you'd been at war and then you had to look at images, not even at images of war, but like if you'd been in the war and that was plaguing you, and you had like 2 days away from war, so that's like the weekend, and then you had to go right back. Like, they were like, okay, we decided you're going back in, and then they just like drove you, you know, and then all, you know, you arrived at like a field to like start shooting people, and you're like, no, that's how I felt. But I didn't know why I had all of the problems talking to people and getting along with people and understanding people in high school that led to everyone bullying me. And then when they did bully me, I didn't know how to normally take it and, you know, get back at them or whatever that everybody else does, because I know high school is not easy for anyone. No, there were at least 20 people in my school who were high school was amazing for, like the popular children. But I didn't understand that at all. And once I got out of school, I was very upset for a long time. I didn't have a quality of life, I would say, for almost 3 years, probably 2.5 years after I got out of high school. I was agoraphobic. I was just so upset. I didn't want to be around people. And then when I was around people, it was in such a limited capacity that I could handle at the time. And I would get very upset about that, and I started to research that on the internet, and that's what led me to understand that I had social anxiety disorder, which was brought on by all of the teasing and everything. And that's still something that I deal with now, although not in the capacity I did when I had first graduated from high school. But you can go right back there. And that's awful. But I knew I had social anxiety disorder, which is basically you can't be around people. You have terrible problems with people. And it wasn't until I'd done numerous things in my life. I tried to go to school a couple times, but I couldn't go through with it, because when I got even into a college or a technical school setting, and they were like showing me around, or I was taking like a test to get in, and I would do well in the test, but then someone would tease me, there was a man who teased me on a tour of a school that I wanted to attend, and I was like, people do this to you when you're not in regular high school? No, I'm not doing it. I moved around quite a few times to live with different family members and try to work in different states, and you really can't outrun yourself. Yes, I still don't like where I live right now, and I would much prefer to live many other places, but I'm not going to be a different person. People won't know me right away, which is great, because you can establish a new identity somewhere else. But, on the inside, you're not going to change. And I still didn't know why I had such problems just trying to do what everybody else did, what I felt was normal for everybody else. Like, you're working your crappy cashier job, you're working your crappy food service job, whatever it is, and why is it so hard to talk to the customers and the other coworkers and the boss, and while you're doing all that, process the actual transaction, like to ring up their food or their groceries or their clothes or whatever? Why was that so difficult when it didn't seem to be difficult for most of the other coworkers? I didn't understand why all of that was so bad. I couldn't make real relationships with people. I was very, worried about who would be my friend. Why wouldn't a guy want to date me? Or why was he treating me a certain way? And I do like to have a drink here and there now, but I did learn that you could go out, I actually didn't even start drinking till I was almost of age, which is very unusual in today's society. But I did learn that was a mechanism, that was a coping mechanism you could use. You could drink, and that would alleviate some of your issues, well, my issues, with worrying what people thought about me, because I do feel like I do have, not to be a jerk or whatever, but I do have a level of intelligence where it's an intelligence and a worry combined, like a Woody Allen type thing, where you can't stop the worries a lot of the time, and especially if you're in a bad situation or whatever, or you're trying to get through something. And for me, I didn't know about autism. Nobody was diagnosed with ADD, which is also considered to be on a certain spectrum with autism. I have nieces and nephews, because I have older brothers and sisters who had children, and I have nieces and nephews who are only a few years younger than me, some that are about 5 years younger than me, that were diagnosed, that those kind of people, or friends that I later made, people who were only within a few years of me, like 5 years, who were diagnosed with ADD in school. No one was diagnosed with ADD when I was in school. I mean, when I was in school, unless you had a severe disability, you were just grouped in all of the regular classes. And even then, I'm glad that they didn't have anything, because I was in a public school that was not treating the children how, when I look back on it, they should be treated. Even at the time, I knew it was wrong. how they would take the children who had disabilities and where they would have them learning, and in fact not have them learning, just kind of like a holding cell for these kids. So in that respect, I don't feel like having any type of diagnosis when I, being in my early 30s now, when I was younger, would have done anything for me as a young child. Now, as a teenager, maybe if somehow I could have gotten help right away when there was bullying and someone knew what this was, then I think that maybe I could have been helped. But by the time anybody offered to take me to see any type of therapist or anything like that, I had been so tortured that I was like, so this is another form of torture, is telling someone all my business and having that person judge me. And I have to, this is what I thought, I would have to go through that because someone else was treating me badly. So I was not open to therapy at all when I was in my late teens, which was the first time anybody tried to get me any kind of social help. So after I had been struggling with knowing that I had social anxiety disorder and basically just pushing through that and drinking to like make friends, to go out with people and stuff like that, I'd also read about medicines and stuff, but I couldn't get any medicines because I wouldn't see a doctor or a therapist or anything. So then I lived my life. Like I said, I had lots of death in my family. I don't want to say I don't know if that makes any difference. It sounds like that shouldn't make any difference with this video, but after a lot of things had happened, I was like reevaluating my life, which I have to constantly do. And I was on one of the social anxiety forums. Well, I really think there's only one that I knew about. I was on the social anxiety forum one night / early morning. Like I would, to just talk to people or read the threads. I didn't do a lot of talking on there, but someone was telling them how they felt. And they said, you know, it does sound like you have social anxiety disorder, but have you ever heard of this Asperger's thing? And they were like, no, I don't know what that is. And so they provided these links. And they were like, I don't remember if the person who gave it to them, I'm not sure if they had autism or if it was somebody in their family, but they knew what Asperger's was, or Asperger's or Asperger's. I don't care how you pronounce it. Anyways, I was like, what is this? So I started reading about it. And I found out that so many things that I had taken for granted as being something about me pertain to so many other people because they were on the autism spectrum. Now, the first thing that I saw was disability. And like I said, when I was growing up, that was bad. It was bad to have any type of disability. And there were no social disability or learning disability or cognitive disability. It was, and I'm going to say something that, you know, I probably put like trigger warning or whatever, but it was, you are retarded, you are a retard. And I don't mean that in a joking sense that people in my generation, yes, used to call each other. I mean, that was all. Like, you don't have the type of mental capacity to do everything that everybody else does. And like I said, if I had been grouped into that group when I was younger, I don't think that would have helped me because people who were in that group didn't get any help with, you know, what you would consider the regular disabilities. But when that was the first thing I thought. And I like freaked out because I had been told my whole life, you're just so smart. You're just so adult. You know, when you're 10 or 11 and you get to plan things for your family or you get to be in charge of whatever, or, you know, you're seen as being very responsible, but at the same time still having like temper tantrums and stuff. But people just think you're difficult or you're a diva or a drama queen. And I didn't know, like I said, nobody I knew heard of any of this stuff. When I told my direct family, I said, this is what's wrong with me. And I know that's going to be a thing, what's wrong with me. But this is what's been going on. I know this is why I'm like how I am. And people were very hesitant to believe me because they thought I made this up. It's funny because the very close family members that I had told about the social anxiety, they saw that at play all the time. And even though that wasn't something that it was common or whatever, like now I know you see articles about social anxiety all the time that basically say it's perpetuated by social media, which I can understand to a fault. But, you know, it's just like, I mean, more people are more open about it too, but even though they didn't really know about that, it seemed more something that they could understand. I knew I was depressed since I was a teenager. My depression they could understand, but to know that those are actually comorbid diseases or symptoms or whatever you want to call it of autism was not something anybody wanted to deal with. And like I said, if anybody knew anything about autism, they knew a little about classic autism, usually from terrible commercials from like Autism Speaks or somebody, or like fundraisers or whatever, but not really what that means. And also, if it's your family, like your parents, sometimes they have the tendency to think it's something they did wrong, or if it's you, there must be something wrong with them. And if that were true, they were able to do everything. Why can't you just get through it? Why can't you just grin and bear it when people treat you badly? And it's just, it was really infuriating and upsetting, and I wanted to get help. I wanted to see a therapist and a psychiatrist. I wanted to see if I needed to get some kind of medicine to help me, if that was a thing I could do. I wanted to see if I needed some kind of therapy that would help me go out and do things, because to an extent, I was very closed in and unable to do a lot of things that other people, not just my age, but people 10 years younger than me were doing. I felt like I was 26 years old, and I was further behind people who were 15 and 16 socially, and working and things like that, schooling, aside from having like my high school diploma, because social skills are not everything, but in a way they are everything. And so basically, to get any kind of help or for anybody to take me seriously, I was told I needed to get a formal diagnosis. I joined Wrong Planet, the Asperger's support basically forum. I joined that forum, maybe one or two other ones. I don't really frequent them anymore, but I read everything. I watched YouTube videos. Believe it or not, that's the first time I really like paid attention to YouTube videos, because people were very thorough and you could really understand them. But I mean, that was a nightmare. Trying to get a diagnosis can be a nightmare too, especially as an adult. And like I said, that doctor that I saw that I did get diagnosed from said, if you were younger, you'd probably be diagnosed with this. But I basically had to research on my own anywhere in the state that I live in that deals with autism, and then narrow that down to somebody who would diagnose someone who didn't have classic autism, and then narrow that down to people who would take the time to diagnose an adult, and then narrow that down to somewhere that I could get transportation-wise. So, and then I was terrible at making phone calls. I had to call all of these places. Maybe there was like 3 or 4 that seemed like a possibility, and talk to people's secretaries and things and see if I could get in. And some of them would be booked up, and some of them would tell me, well, I don't care what it says on the internet. We don't do anything with adults. If you're an adult, you're SOL basically a lot of the time. So I finally found a doctor in the big city, the city nearest where I live. I live in a crap hole, like I said. But I went there, and he told me, well, yeah, we can, if you have anything, we can diagnose it, but you have to come back. I had to come back for like over a month. Like, it was like once or twice a week. I want to say it was like once a week. I went there at least 3 or 4 times. It was a spread out thing, but they had me do different tests and stuff. And the only thing I would say about that is, if you do feel like you're on the spectrum and you do need to be diagnosed to get some kind of medical help, don't look up the test about autism, because I didn't think about it. I just wanted to be as informed as I could about what's going on with me. And I did read about one of these tests that they do give to children who are in the spectrum, and they did try to do that test on me. And I was like, I'm just going to tell you up front, I already know what this test is, and I already come out on the autism side when I think about it. Now, they had me do a bunch of different other stuff. They had me tell a bunch of personal stories. I mean, I've never cried so much with a stranger, other than like, a drunk party night, or actually with my therapist later that I was able to get. But I mean, being diagnosed, it was very difficult. And the actual diagnosis itself, probably the only helpful thing that helped me get was able to get in to see my therapist, who I still consider my therapist, even though I haven't been able to go anytime recently, but she's great. But basically that they understood that I was on the spectrum. I had proof that I was on the spectrum, and she usually just deals with children because people are not coming to her about this. And past that, anybody else I had talked to, that doctor himself who diagnosed me, they said there were a couple things up in that city, because it's a big city, like support groups basically, but not a lot of, like, I've heard of CBT and things like that. I know it's very controversial, the different types of therapies for people with Asperger's, on the people who are on the spectrum, but I couldn't do anything like that where I live. So, but it's always given me the thing of that now I could tell people, this is what's wrong with me. This is my deal. When I was in high school and I would flake out and not be able to go, I had like one best friend towards the end of high school after everything happened, would not be able to go hang out with her, and we would ruin friendships, and people call me names, and they'd be like, I don't understand why you can't do this or that. Basically, just knowing all this told me why the things happened in the first place, how I got to that point, and I was able to basically retrace my steps, and then I was able to learn coping mechanisms from the internet, from books, from studying the actual syndrome, disease, whatever you want to call it, you know, the way your brain works, you know, that we're not neurotypical. I was able to come to a lot of that stuff with help of basically strangers and just researching, which I love to read, but it is very difficult. It's just, to come to to first come to the part where you actually figure out what it is, if you've never been familiar with autism, or you'd only been vaguely familiar with, you know, the scare tactic, classic autism fundraising, and then to get to the point where you say, yes, this is me, and then to get to the point where you're like, okay, I'm going to put up with a lot of crap to get diagnosed, and then to find out the diagnosis is very much meaningless to a lot of people, and that you aren't going to get the help you thought you were going to get. I actually have a friend on Facebook who is very upset right now because he's autistic and he feels like he has never been able to get the help, and I feel like he's done a lot more stuff than I ever have, but he has other, you know, things that are going on. But just as an adult, just know that there are other people like you out there who figured this out, and that it is difficult. And like I said, when you learn skills and stuff, that would help, but that's how I figured it out. That's just a part of my life, and whoa, that was way too raw, but that's, you know, my experience with figuring out who I am, what I have, what I am, whatever you want to say it is, and how you can, you know, get a diagnosis. That's it for right now.